From the air, it almost doesn't seem real. An almost perfectly circular lake set in the middle of a town. In a state shaped by coastlines, Lake DeFuniak is something else entirely. Lakes like this are rare, hidden just inland from Florida's famous beaches, far from the salt air and the crowds of South Walton. Long before this was a town, the land beneath this place shifted. Limestone dissolved, the earth gave way, and water, constant and patient, filled the space. What emerged was not just a lake, but a natural basin fed by shallow groundwater, rainfall, and replenished quietly with spring boils, holding its shape through centuries of change. Scientists can explain how it formed. Locals will tell you it has a pull, a kind of gravity, a feeling that draws people in and keeps them circling back. It's no accident that a town grew here, or that its streets, its homes, its churches, and its stories all seem to lean toward the water. Lake DeFuniak didn't just shape the land, it shaped the life around it. This is a story of a lake that built a town, a place where culture took root, where community still meets again and again at the water's edge. This is Lake DeFuniak, and this is where life comes full circle.
This, we think, is a sinkhole, but probably not in the way you think of a sinkhole like from Central Florida where they collapse into the ground and it's catastrophic and a house falls in. This is sometimes called a cover subsidence sinkhole. And what that means is that there is some limestone down below the surface. The nearest limestone is probably 175 feet or so down below. So it hasn't collapsed into the sinkhole, but there is dissolved limestone. Limestone dissolves relatively easily, and the overlying material slowly falls into it. It might be helpful to think of it as like an hourglass when the sand falls down the hourglass. So this material is slowly sifting down into this hole. The limestone is part of what's called the Florida aquifer, which is where we get most of our fresh water. However, the water that fills this lake is not coming from the Florida aquifer. It's coming from the surface water. The Florida aquifer is a little deeper, so the water that fills this lake is seeping in through the side and coming in. There might be a spring down there, but it's more of a seepage structure. It's certainly not a meteorite crater. It's just not. So it's a popular, fun idea, but if it was a crater, we would know about it. It's a little frustrating. The whole question of the lake has come up before, and there's just not a lot of information on it. And it's just assumed that it's this because so many other lakes are. But and there could be some other studies I'm just not aware of. But it would be nice, for example, just to traverse the lake with the boat and get the depth profile, get a little map of the depth. That would tell you a lot.
What Dr. Bryan describes is a lake that still holds unanswered questions, not myths, but details that simply haven't been fully mapped. Bobby Beasley, a longtime DeFuniak Springs resident, former supervisor of elections for Walton County, and an avid fisherman, spent years paying close attention to this water. Using his experience on the lake and careful observation, he charted 2 spring boils, places where the water moves differently, rising from below. It wasn't a formal scientific study, but it was evidence. A spring boil is where the lake breathes, water rising quietly from below, just enough to be noticed by those who know how to look. For families who arrived here generations ago, the lake wasn't a mystery to solve. It was an invitation.
I'm Dr. Melinda Henderson. I've lived in DeFuniak for about 43 years. My husband is 6th generation from here, and my granddaughter is 8th generation from here. I formed a joint committee and a public-private partnership with the city through Forward DeFuniak to seek a nomination for the Chautauqua campus as a National Historic Landmark. That's in its final stages.
Once that designation is achieved, a town's story enters the national record, where preservation becomes a responsibility, not a preference. And in DeFuniak Springs, that responsibility begins at the water's edge with the discovery of Lake DeFuniak itself.
Some executives for the Pensacola and Atlantic Railroad were surveying for the railroad route. The state had urged them to connect up the railroad from Pensacola to Quincy because that's as far as it went out of Tallahassee. And they came upon this place. They were interested in selling railroad tickets. So they said, well, what could this be? When they connected the railroad, they revisited it and started the Chautauqua Hotel. Originally, the lake was open pond. It then became DeFuniak Lake, then became Lake DeFuniak, and then it became DeFuniak Springs. They did a good job advertising it. They wanted to sell a lot of railroad tickets.
History can be recorded in documents and designations. It also lives in memory, carried by the people who chose to protect what came before. Marie Henson has spent a lifetime listening to the stories of this place and telling them back so they wouldn't be lost. And when it comes to understanding how this town gathered around the lake and why, she keeps the memory alive.
They would come in on the trains, and as many as 10,000 would come in for the assembly. Chautauqua is lifelong learning, and the pillars are religion, education, the arts, and recreation.
Those weren't abstract ideas here. They were built into the landscape. The architecture didn't just surround the water by accident. It followed it.
The Chautauqua building is the one that just comes to mind. 1975, Hurricane Eloise took the back off. These are reminders, constant reminders of the Victorian era, where you want to relive that. You're proud of that heritage.
For a time, DeFuniak Springs was defined by ideas, all gathering at the edge of an almost perfect circle of water. But as the Chautauqua assemblies faded, the lake stepped quietly out of the spotlight and into everyday life.
I was introduced to the lake, I know by age 4, because that's when I learned to swim. Lake DeFuniak was a very populated lake. Back in the day, they had people skiing and people playing on the docks and this type of thing. We'd always congregate down at the lake. Sometimes we would fish, but most of the time we were just swimming and getting into a lot of trouble. And we could stay in that water for hours on end. And then around 65, it all kind of came to a halt. They stopped the public swimming in the lake.
By the mid-1960s, the lake was closed to swimming. The reasons were layered: concerns about the water quality, changing infrastructure, and a South in the midst of a profound social change. For years, the town lived beside the lake, not with it.
Well, when I came back here in 1983, the town was basically dead. Most of the houses on the circle were derelict. Most of the shops downtown were closed or near closing. I had started doing some research and was fascinated that DeFuniak, during the time of Chautauqua, was one of the most important cities in the nation. And we were one of the most educated cities in the nation. So I started a little organization called the Turnaround Society and got some people involved and saying, we need to, try to do something for our little towns. And then that led to my bringing a program called Elder Hostel. You go to a single destination, you stay there for a week, and you have a course of study. Well, guess what? We brought them to little old DeFuniak. It brought lots of people to DeFuniak. That was very good for business downtown. So after about 10 years, I thought, I believe we might could start Chautauqua. And when I turned it over in 06, I had built that program to 2 weeks, and it was very successful. The community loved it. All the people from town would come, and they would meet folks from all over the country who were bringing in new ideas. So the locals began, "Oh, yeah, we're really something. We're great."
Sure.
And a huge amount of pride began to build for the community of DeFuniak, and that was very pleasing.
Pride returned before prosperity. Ideas returned before certainty. And slowly, people began to look again at what sat quietly at the center of town. What's happening now feels new, but it isn't unfamiliar. This town has always circled back around ideas and around the arts. Music opens doors. Food invites people to stay. One table becomes another. One night out becomes a rhythm. And slowly the town begins to fill its spaces again, not with noise, but with meaning. These aren't destinations built overnight. They're places shaped by people who believe connecting still matters. Every revival has its connectors. People who don't arrive to remake a place, but to recognize what's already there. For DeFuniak Springs, one of those people is Tim Jackson, a connector who understood that this town didn't need something louder, it needed something that listened. Through his Storytellers Tour, Tim helped activate a live music scene, bringing national touring artists into the historic Chautauqua Theater downtown.
I wanted just so much to revive that theater musically because they were doing children's plays, but I wanted to do music there. I'm able to tell everybody there's no one sitting in the audience that is trying to get your space with a record company. They're not trying to get your gig next week at the listening room or Bluebird or whatever. There's no one here. Everyone in this audience tonight is truly from the bottom of their heart hoping that you have the best show you've ever had tonight. I don't know anywhere else I could actually come and make a statement like that. Just saying that these people are truly, they're pulling for you tonight. And that's the safe space that I wanted to create for all of these artists. And it's true. It happens here.
Every town has a center, not always marked on a map, but felt. In DeFuniak Springs, that center has always been this lake. It has watched generations arrive and leave and return. What is shaping this town now isn't one plan or one person. It's people listening to the past, to one another, to what still matters. Believing that art has a place, that food brings people closer, that ideas still belong here, and that water still calls us to gather. Life doesn't move in straight lines. It circles around memory, around purpose, around places that shape us. This lake built a town, and each time we return to walk, to listen, to celebrate, life comes full circle.